For Elijah Morgan, his intelligence wasn't just a gift. It was the very thing that made him a target. Every morning, he carefully packed his weathered backpack with advanced textbooks, scientific journals, and notebooks filled with equations that would confound even some of his teachers. These weren't assigned readings. They were his passion, his escape, his future carefully curated in ink and paper. Westridge High operated on an unspoken social hierarchy, and Elijah, with his second-hand clothes, thick glasses, and perpetual stack of books, occupied the lowest rung. He moved through the hallways like a ghost, eyes downcast, trying to navigate the treacherous waters of adolescence without drawing attention. But invisibility is impossible when you're different, and Elijah was different in ways his classmates couldn't comprehend. Look who it is, Harvard in the flesh, mocked Trevor Daniels, the star quarterback whose academic achievements were as unremarkable as his athletic ones were celebrated. The irony of the nickname was that it was meant as an insult, hurled at Elijah like a weapon. What Trevor and his followers didn't realize was how close to the truth they actually were. The collision was deliberate, Trevor's shoulder against Elijah's, calculated to appear accidental while delivering maximum impact. Elijah's books scattered across the hallway floor like fallen soldiers, pages bending under the careless feet of passing students. His copy of Advanced Theoretical Physics skidded toward the drinking fountain. His notebook, filled with original research on quantum entanglement, landed face down in a puddle of spilled soda. Oops, Trevor sneered, high-fiving his teammate as laughter rippled through the corridor. Maybe if you had your head out of those books, you'd see where you're going. What they didn't see, what they couldn't possibly understand, was the letter tucked carefully inside Elijah's worn wallet. The Harvard University letterhead, the words, "Full Academic Scholarship," the personal note from the Dean of Admissions expressing how impressed the committee had been with his research proposal. They didn't see the midnight hours Elijah spent working at his uncle's garage to help support his single mother, only to come home and study until his eyes burned. They didn't see the makeshift laboratory in his basement where he conducted experiments that professors twice his age would find innovative. As Elijah gathered his scattered belongings, hands trembling slightly from a mixture of humiliation and rage, he caught sight of Ms. Winters, the physics teacher, watching from her classroom doorway. Unlike the others, she saw Elijah, really saw him. She knew what that Harvard letter represented. Not just an escape from this small town and its smaller minds, but recognition of a brilliance that had bloomed despite the harshest conditions. "Need a hand?" she asked, kneeling beside him to retrieve a dog-eared copy of a research paper he'd been corresponding with the author about. "I'm fine," Elijah mumbled, the practiced response of someone who had learned early that asking for help often invited more trouble. "You know," Ms. Winters said quietly, "they mock what they don't understand, and they don't understand you, Elijah. Not even close." He looked up then, meeting her eyes for the first time. "Sometimes I think that's worse than being hated for who I am. At least then, they'd actually know me." The profound simplicity of his statement caught her off guard. How many brilliant minds had been dimmed by the casual cruelty of those who couldn't see past their own limitations? How many potential world changers had been convinced they were nothing because the voices around them were louder than the voice within? Elijah carefully stacked his recovered books, aligning their edges with the precision that characterized everything he did. Each volume represented not just knowledge, but a step away from this place, a brick in the bridge he was building toward a future where his mind would be valued rather than vilified. What Trevor and the others couldn't see was that every time they slapped those books from Elijah's hands, they were inadvertently pushing him closer to a world where he would finally belong. A world where the very qualities that made him a target here would make him exceptional there. The world of Harvard, where minds like his were treasured, not tormented. They saw a bookworm. They never bothered to look close enough to see the butterfly emerging. The emotional toll of constant bullying carved itself into Elijah's psyche like water wearing down stone. Subtle at first, then creating undeniable changes in the landscape of his self-confidence. Each morning, the dread would begin before he even opened his eyes, a heavy weight pressing against his chest as he contemplated another day of navigating Westridge High's hostile corridors. What began as external intimidation had slowly transformed into an internal voice of doubt. Despite acceptance letters and academic achievements that objectively proved his brilliance, Elijah found himself questioning everything. Did Harvard make a mistake? Was he truly scholarship material? Could someone from his background, someone who inspired such contempt in his peers, really belong among the academic elite? The night after Trevor's latest hallway assault, Elijah sat at his desk staring at a problem set that would normally have engaged his mind completely. Instead, his thoughts scattered like his books had across the hallway floor. The equations blurred as unbidden tears threatened to fall. He pushed his chair back, disgusted with himself for allowing their cruelty to penetrate so deeply. "Focus," he whispered to himself, a mantra that had carried him through years of similar moments. But the voice of doubt had grown louder lately, more persistent. It whispered that perhaps all his striving was pointless, that people like him weren't meant for places like Harvard, that the social rejection he experienced daily was somehow deserved. His mother noticed the change during dinner, the way he pushed food around his plate instead of devouring it with his usual appetite for everything life offered. "Something happened at school today?" she asked, her voice gentle but knowing. Years of raising a gifted son in a world that often punished difference had made her attuned to the subtle shifts in his demeanor. "Nothing new," Elijah replied, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. She reached across the table, her hand, calloused from years of working double shifts as a nurse, covering his. "You know what I see when I look at you? I see your father's curiosity and my stubbornness. That's a combination too powerful to be diminished by small minds." Elijah's father had been a physics professor whose promising career was cut short by cancer when Elijah was just 7. The memory of him hunched over their kitchen table, explaining complex concepts with childlike wonder, remained one of Elijah's most precious possessions. "Dad would have handled all this better than I do," Elijah said quietly. Nothing seemed to touch him. His mother's laugh held both warmth and sadness. "Oh, sweetheart, your father struggled terribly with the politics of academia. He just never wanted you to see that part. He wanted you to see only the joy of discovery." This revelation that his father, his intellectual hero, had also faced rejection and doubt, shifted something in Elijah's perception. The isolation he felt wasn't unique to him. Perhaps it was the price paid by those who saw the world differently. That night, he retrieved a box from the top shelf of his closet. Inside was his father's journal, filled with both brilliant theoretical physics and deeply human reflections on feeling like an outsider in his department. Elijah had avoided reading it fully, preserving it like a time capsule to be opened when he could truly understand its contents. Now, turning the pages, he found unexpected solace in his father's words. "To innovate is to stand apart, and to stand apart is often to stand alone. The question isn't whether you'll face resistance, you will, but whether you'll allow that resistance to reshape your path or strengthen your resolve to continue on it." Elijah closed the journal, feeling a connection that transcended time and loss. The bullying hadn't stopped hurting, but somehow its power to define him had diminished. His father had faced similar challenges and continued forward. Harvard had recognized something in Elijah that his peers couldn't see, or perhaps refused to acknowledge. The next morning, when he walked into physics class, Ms. Winters handed back their latest tests. "Exceptional work, Elijah," she said, loud enough for nearby students to hear. "Your approach to the quantum tunneling problem was particularly insightful." He accepted the paper, marked with a perfect score and additional comments inviting him to consider publishing his approach in a student journal, with a quiet thank you that carried none of his usual embarrassment at being singled out. Behind him, he heard Trevor snicker, "Teacher's pet," followed by muffled laughter. For the first time, the words felt hollow, disconnected from who Elijah knew himself to be. The voice of doubt was still there, but now it competed with another voice, one that sounded remarkably like his father's, reminding him that the path of exceptional minds was rarely smooth, but always worth traveling. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Elijah's journey from victimization to empowerment unfolded gradually, like a complex equation solving itself one variable at a time. The pivotal moment came 3 weeks before graduation, as college acceptance announcements rippled through the senior class. Harvard's early admission letter had been Elijah's secret strength for months. A promise of escape he'd held close, sharing only with his mother and Ms. Winters. But secrets have a way of emerging when they're meant to, and Elijah's emerged during the senior awards assembly. Principal Hargrove stood at the podium, her voice carrying through the gymnasium. Each year, Westridge High nominates one student for the National Science Foundation's Future Innovators Grant. This year's nominee has not only been accepted to Harvard on a full academic scholarship, but has also been recognized by the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory for his independent research on quantum computing applications. A murmur spread through the assembled students. Elijah felt his heartbeat accelerate as Ms. Winters gave him an encouraging nod from the side of the stage. This student exemplifies the intellectual curiosity and perseverance that defines scientific excellence. Principal Hargrove continued. Please join me in congratulating Elijah Morgan. The silence that followed his name was profound. A collective pause of disbelief before scattered applause began. As Elijah made his way to the stage, he passed Trevor and his friends, their expressions a mixture of confusion and reluctant reassessment. Standing at the podium, looking out at peers who had either tormented or ignored him for years, Elijah felt something unexpected. Not vindication or triumph, but a strange sense of clarity. These people had never defined him, though he'd allowed their perceptions to shape his own for too long. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady in a way it had never been before. "Science has always been my refuge, a place where questions matter more than appearances, and where being different isn't a liability but an asset. I'm grateful to those who saw potential in me, especially when I struggled to see it myself." His eyes found Ms. Winters in the crowd, then moved to Trevor's group. "And I've learned that assumptions about people, any people, limit not just them but ourselves. We all have capabilities others can't see. Mine happen to be quantum physics. But I wonder how many other hidden talents we miss when we decide who someone is before they've had the chance to show us." The applause that followed was different this time, more genuine, tinged with a recognition that extended beyond mere academic achievement. Elijah had done something few 17-year-olds manage. He'd spoken truth without seeking revenge. In the weeks that followed, subtle shifts occurred in the school's ecosystem. The hallway collisions stopped. Conversations paused less awkwardly when he approached. And one Tuesday afternoon, as Elijah worked on his final physics project in the lab after hours, Trevor appeared in the doorway. "Hey," he said, the bravado that usually colored his voice noticeably absent. Elijah looked up, wariness and curiosity competing for prominence. "Hey!" Trevor shifted uncomfortably. "So Harvard. That's impressive." "Thanks," Elijah replied, waiting for the punchline, the hidden barb that usually followed any seeming compliment. Instead, Trevor hesitated, then asked, "How'd you do it? I mean, I couldn't even get into state without a football scholarship." The vulnerability in the question caught Elijah off guard. This was Trevor Daniels, confident, celebrated Trevor, asking him for advice. The irony wasn't lost on Elijah, but neither was the opportunity. "It wasn't one thing," he said finally. "It was showing up every day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard." Trevor nodded slowly. "I got cut from the training camp," he admitted. "Coach says I need to improve my analytical thinking if I want to make starting lineup next year. Says I need to understand strategy, not just execute plays." The confession hung in the air between them, an offering of sorts. Elijah considered it for a moment before closing his notebook. "The principles of physics actually apply pretty well to football. Force, momentum, angles of impact," he said. "I could show you sometime, if you want." The tentative alliance formed that afternoon wasn't friendship, exactly, but it was something neither boy had anticipated. A mutual recognition of worth beyond their assigned roles. On graduation day, as Elijah prepared to deliver his valedictorian address, his mother handed him a small package. Inside was his father's favorite fountain pen. "For writing new chapters," she said simply. Standing at the podium, looking out at the faces of those who had witnessed his journey, some who had tried to impede it, others who had supported it, Elijah felt the weight of the pen in his pocket. It represented not just his father's legacy but his own emerging one. A story of resilience written not despite adversity, but through it. The bullying hadn't made him stronger. That was too simple a narrative, one that justified cruelty. But he had become stronger despite it, building his intellectual confidence brick by brick until it stood impervious to the opinions of those who never truly saw him. As he began to speak, Elijah caught sight of Harvard's crimson banner among the college pennants decorating the gymnasium. The sight no longer filled him with desperate longing for escape, but with a quiet certainty that he was ready, not just academically, but emotionally, for whatever challenges awaited.